apologies, please, and any changes and declarations of interest.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I've had apologies from Ian Sharp and James Burkett, and also apologies from our shadow members, Laura Clark and Karen Lewis. Those are the apologies I've had. Would you like me to go through forum membership changes as well,
Yes,
Chair?
please.
Yep. So Lindsay Barnett, head of Croyland, Highfields and Parkland Nurseries, has joined Forum to take on the role of representing maintained nursery schools in place of Angela Prodger. So welcome to Lindsay. Lindsay will also be a member of the West Shadow Forum, while Angela will become a member of the North Shadow Forum. Jenny Thorpe from Northampton College has joined Forum to take on the role of representing post-16 providers in place of Pat Brennan-Barrett, both of Northampton College, and Debbie Bastin of Malton Primary, Debbie Bastin is one of our maintained primary school representatives, has retired from Forum, so we'll take the necessary steps to recruit a replacement for her.
Okay, thank you. Should we take any declarations of interest now? If anybody has, please raise a hand or indicate if there is anything that needs to be noted other than the usual, or put it into the chat, please, so that we have the record. Okay, if not, then Chair, we will, do we need to at this point mention that we have the North and West Shadow Forum members with us as well?
Yes, Chair, would you like me to do that?
Yeah, I mean, or I can do that. It's absolutely fine.
Yeah,
I mean,
happy to, Chair.
Yeah. Okay, so we have, you will have seen that there's various communications about the establishment of the North and the West Shadow Fora. The Shadow Fora have been created as a necessary part of the process of disaggregation, and that will be happening on the 1st of April 2021. So item 4 on the agenda will give us some more information about that process. But in the meantime, apart from any other members who've expressed interest about being on those Shadow Fora, we're also welcoming some new members to us today. Those new members are Nikki Lamond, who's an Academy North and West, Rod Warsap, Academy North and West, Peter Lever, Academy North, Laura Clark, Maintained Special North, and she sent her apologies, Karen Lewis, Academy Special West, and she also has sent her apologies, Lindsay Barnett, Maintained Nursery West, although Lindsay is also, as Paul just explained, now replacing Angela as an actual member of Forum, and Peter Cantley, who's from the diocese, Peterborough Diocese, who's representing North and West. So although Shadow Forum members will be in attendance, voting at this meeting is restricted to current Forum members, having taken account of the views of Shadow Forum members where appropriate. So where a decision on a budget for 21-22 is split, North and West, such as de-delegation, the voting will include all current Forum members who are eligible to vote. That's i.e. all primary reps, maintained reps will vote on primary de-delegation for North and West, regardless of where their schools are located. Okay, and when we come onto the voting, you'll see how that will pan out when we come to the voting aspect. Okay, so now I am going to pass over to you, Secretary, because it's election time.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as member will note from the agenda and my communication prior to the meeting, it is time to elect the Chair and Vice Chair for the forthcoming year. I did ask for expressions of interest in the positions. I've had one expression of interest in the position of Forum Chair from Joe Sanchez-Thompson. Are there any other candidates who are interested in putting themselves forward as Chair of Forum? Okay, I don't see any hands raised. Can I have a formal proposer, please, for Joe? Okay, can I have a seconder, please? Okay, I'm just going to move Joe into the waiting room while we conduct the vote. Okay, can all those in favour of appointing Jo Sanchez-Thompson as chair for the forthcoming year please raise their hands? And all those against, please? Any abstentions? Okay, that's carried. I will readmit Jo. Welcome back, Jo. Congratulations, you've been appointed as chair for the forthcoming year. You're on mute, I'm afraid. Jo, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, everybody. I did feel that as the Northamptonshire Forum came to an end and when we separated into our two separate organisations as we move forward, that I would put myself forward to see us through to that end. So thank you very much for that. And being in the waiting room gave me a chance to finish my cup of tea as well. So we will now move on then to the election of the vice chair. Do we have any nominations for the vice chair secretary?
Chair, I've had one expression of interest from the current vice chair, James Burkett.
Anyone else interested in putting themselves forward for vice chair? Just know via the chat or via your hand. There are quite a lot of people in this meeting, so chat is quite useful. Thank you, Rob. Thank you. It's quite useful to use the chat at this meeting rather than hands because it's difficult to see all of the different videos. But in that case, I'd like to propose that James Burkett as vice chair.
Do we have a seconder?
Yep, John. Thank you, John.
Okay, can I have a show of hands, please? All those in favour? Any against? Any abstentions? Okay, I think that's carried, Chair.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. Okay, so those out of the way, if we can move on then to
Sorry,
the
Chair, Siobhan Hearn has her hand raised, I think.
Oh, sorry. Siobhan. I'm afraid I do not have that many pictures on my screen, so.
Siobhan, you've used the raise hand function. Did you want to speak? Okay, I think that may have been an accidental hand raise, Chair.
Okay.
We'll carry on.
Okay. So if we can now then move on to the minutes of the meeting that was on the 7th of July. That was via Zoom. So if we can just run through those minutes. So I will start with page 1. And if anybody could put into the chat any comments that they have. You can, there are a lot of people in here, so if messages could go via the chat, that would be great. Thank you. So page 1, if we're just checking through now for factual accuracy, we have page 1, which is in attendance and apologies. Page 2, outturn. Page 3, which was DSG monitoring. Page 4, which moved on to the unitary update. Page 5, which was the COVID update, and then the schools forum plan for moving forward. And then the final page, which was any other business. For those who were in attendance, are we happy that those are an accurate set of minutes for the meeting in July? If anybody has any objections to those being accurate, I think that's probably an easier way to do it. Could you please put a note in the chat saying that you have something that you would like to correct? If not, I will take it that those are an accurate record of the minutes. Thank you very much, Secretary. Okay, welcome back, Siobhan. Okay, so one of the things there was, in terms of any points arising, officer feedback from those is that there was no further action on any of the points arising other than the item on redundancy dedelegation that will come up during the meeting. Okay. But just the update on the fieldwork family support, it says would be brought to forum at a future meeting. Do we know which meeting that might be?
Hi Joe, Sharon here.
Hi Sharon.
I think we can, it sits in the safeguarding function of our children's services. So I can get an update from Cornelia. I think I was on leave for this meeting. So, and we can certainly bring that to the next meeting because it's attached to form and function business. So I'll take a next step to link with Cornelia, our AD in social care, and we'll get a briefing for the next meeting.
And I think that's one of the things that has been an ongoing item over the years, and I do believe we have to vote on it. Is it the next meeting we vote, Secretary, or is it the meeting after that?
I believe it is the December meeting, Chair.
Yes, I believe it's so it really is important that we have something because every year we did.
So Paul, I'll take a next step and I'll get a written briefing, which perhaps we can circulate to the minutes, and then it means people have got time to read it and then also ask any further questions for the vote for the next meeting round.
Understood, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so just moving on then. So the next item we have, item 4, which is Future Northants, and it is an update on the unitary authority and where we are. So that's Kathy or Sharon or both.
Hello everybody. Kathy is unable to attend today, but she will be attending hereafter. Unfortunately, she had a prior diary engagement. So I just thought I'd give a quick overview as to where we are in terms of preparing for our 2 new unitaries. As known, we have now got a direction around the strategic blueprint for education services for the county, and we are working towards delivering those and as we move towards vesting day. In the main, that means that many of our education services will split for the north and the west, but there are some services that will remain as together for a period of time in order to either provide stability or because of the scale of numbers, it's deemed sensible at this point to keep those together as individual services. So we're working through a programme to identify the new structures required for the north and the west. And also that obviously involves all the work that we've done in relation to the DSG expenditure and the DSG funding requirements through Schools Forum, as per our new colleagues joining this meeting today. We have appointed, Kathy Hadley has been appointed as the Director for Children's Services, and she will provide that service for both the north and the west. And that will provide continuity for colleagues that don't know. Kathy's been with the local authority for over a year as initially as an assistant director, but then as the Director for Children's Services. So that's a positive appointment in the relation to continuity, stability of the leadership team in that respect. So we're now moving through a transition programme as per the blueprint directions. I suppose really, as you'd all expect, that means now we get into the finer detail around staff location, staff 2P, etc. And we're working with the Future Northants team against that transition plan at this point in time. Obviously, we're communicating with staff as we need to, but also it is very much business as usual with regard to our daily function and operation. Many colleagues know that a lot of our locality work is already split in North and West teams. So in some services, the split between North and West is actually quite minimal because they've already been working in specific localities. So the finer detail is being worked through at this point in time as per the blueprint direction, and we will move to that transition phase for vesting day. Outside of that, working very closely with Beth and Paul in relation to our schools forum structures, hence the new colleagues that have joined us today, but also making sure we have that forward programme of activity to ensure continuity, and then the eventual splitting of the new school forums. And again, we will move through, working with Future Northants colleagues, a transition plan for that.
Okay, is there another slide, or is that?
One more, oh, a couple more.
Okay,
Yeah.
So moving. Okay, so schools forum, sorry, I think I've covered that. I've just moved down, Paul.
Yep.
Okay, shadow forums recruitment. As we've said, thank you to those colleagues that have joined us. I think we still have a couple of places available, Paul, is that correct?
Yeah, there's some places for primary maintained members, particularly in the north, where we only have one of our 3 places filled.
Yeah.
And also some places for academy representatives in the north as well.
Okay, so we have obviously reached out to colleagues in the schools estate, and we will do that again just to help support the population of our figures. Moving on. Okay, I think we've got the shadow form structures, we've started our induction processes, and then we will move colleagues into various structures moving forward. Okay, so again, we will follow the process as set down in relation to decision making, and we will ensure that there is the continuity and stability in relation to the consultation processes and votes being taken. And then thereafter, we will move into the new school forum structures. Okay, moving forward then, day 1, we move into the formal structures for each authority being responsible for the management of their own forums. But again, as Paul's outlined in a previous meeting for our new colleagues, we have the benefit of some colleagues staying on from the old school forum into the new school forums to provide continuity. Okay, Paul?
Yep, it's just the structures after that.
Okay, and then there's the finer details in relation to the figures and the expressions of interest that we have in relation to populating those positions.
Thank you, Sharon. Are there any questions anyone has for Sharon about that presentation, or if there are some wider questions, they're not particularly for now, but it might be useful for a way for those to be collected by the local authority if there are wider questions about the unitary. Is there a forum for that, Sharon, or is there a way for wider questions to be collated by the authority from schools about the change?
Yeah, we have some head teacher representatives, and I think as we move through the formal planning parts now around the new structures, I think as you know, Jo, some of it has been fairly difficult to do because of COVID, and we've been very mindful of the stresses on head teachers and your leadership teams in relation to that. So I think it's probably going to be December, January time where the plans will firm up, and then I think we will actually use the head teacher representatives that we have. But obviously at this point in time, we've been quite mindful of just the volume of activities alongside the business as usual because of the COVID planning. So if again, Paul, I'll take a next step. When we're in a position to do that, we will circulate who the head teacher representatives are, and we'll use that as the channel for comments and queries to come through. And obviously we'll provide the transparency around the new structures and the new systems. I think anything pertaining to schools forum, we should do through this mechanism and through Paul, but the wider schools estate, if that makes sense, I think we should link that through the head teacher reps, and we'll confirm a process for that in the next few weeks.
I'm just thinking there will be people who will be getting worried about this as well. So it might be worth a holding sentence in one of the letters that goes to head teacher, says that we are working on it. We're just holding off for now because of that. So I think there will be people who are starting to get worried about what that change means for them. So actually not saying anything about it might make their worries worse. So it's
absolutely. So I'll link with our colleagues in Future Northants, and we'll get that position statement out now, but we'll also point towards, you know, the now and the next type conversation. So absolutely, I'll take that next step.
Okay, thank you very much, Sharon. There's a question from Kevin about plans for admissions into SEN, about students travelling from north to west, west to north, and impact on budget planning.
Yes, I mean, we're working through, so the school's admissions team is obviously currently a county-wide provision. So that is one of the teams that we've decided from a stability and from a timing point of view, it's best to keep that team together, because obviously April is a busy month for us. So there will be stability. So again, in the plan, some teams, and school admissions is a perfect example of that, where the decision has been for the time being for that team to stay together. Obviously, the work that we are doing is looking at where our children currently are, and we as we move from a county-wide structure to north and west, we will have some children for a period of time, thinking about, for example, children in our special schools that will maybe live in the north and travel to the west, etc. So rest assured, all those details and plans are being worked through, and obviously that they will be taken into consideration in relation to the mobility that our children have at this point in time, but also how that may continue for a period of time as children travel through their education system.
And I think this is something that we, for the rest of forum, that I raised at pre-meet about children moving across what will now be county boundaries and into schools. And Kath has raised the point there that it's the same in alternative provision as well. So just to reinforce to colleagues that it's a question that I too raised at the pre-meet, and we discussed that the issues of children going across boundaries, which over time will work its way through, but obviously at this point in time we do have those children, and making sure that that's remains seamless as possible for them is an important part of your planning, I'm sure, Sharon.
Yeah, and I don't know if Beth wants to add anything, but certainly thinking about the high needs funding block, and we've absolutely looked at those arrangements. So it's, as you can imagine, a very complex piece of work, but it's absolutely child-centred, where we know that we have operated as a county, we will need to split, and so therefore for a period of time, as you say, Jo, some children will be moving from the north to the west. But obviously, from a strategic planning point of view, looking at why that is, sufficiency, school placements, etc. And then the new unitaries will obviously develop their onward plans around those issues.
Okay. Any other questions, colleagues, or comments to share? Okay, then if not, we will move on to the next item, which is Beth, and she's going to talk to us about the DSG monitoring. Over to you, Beth.
Great, thank you. Paul, do you want me to do the slides so you don't have to?
It'll probably be easier for you for your items, yes, please.
Yeah. Right, thank you. Just minimise everybody's faces. So the current position overarching on the DSG is a worsening position. It looks like 5 million forecast overspend against the local budget of 233 million. So that's after the academy recruitment, which is that's an indicative view at the moment based on data to period 6. So halfway through the year, we've moved to a forecast 5 million overspend. That's a 2.2% overall overspend on our local budget. But overall, as I'll talk on the next slide, that's still within the 1% when we're looking at the whole DSG grant. The overspend is, as we've discussed previously, due to the high needs block pressures. There's 5.3 million overspend, which broken down here is due to the increased number and cost of out-of-county placements, which is a 3.2 million forecast overspend. The increased special school demand, a forecast 1.6 million overspend. Increased demand for provision in mainstream settings, an increase of 1.2 million overspend. And alternative provisions look like a 0.1 million overspend. Those overspends are partly offset by an underspend on SEN unit provision of 900,000 at the moment. So overall, if an authority has a predicted cumulative deficit of 1% or greater, we'd be required to submit a recovery plan to the DfE, outlining how we'd bring that deficit balance back into balance in a 3-year time frame. The calculation is gross of recoupment, so it's looking at the overall 647 million. So we're still within that 1% calculation. But obviously, if the high needs pressures continue to escalate, it's possible that a plan would be required for 2021-22.
Can I just say, would that plan therefore revolve around north and west? Because it wouldn't be a plan for the overall authority, would it? It would be a one.
Yeah, so we'd have to start looking at how the overspend would be apportioned between the two authorities. But as we're largely on a kind of 45, 65, 50, 50 basis, depending on which part of the budget, which part of the spend you look at, we would sort of assume that both would be over 1% if overarching we are. But we'd have to look at the detail closer to the end of the year.
Okay, thank you.
So
within the schools block, we currently have a, sorry.
Just Sharon, Joe, just to say, so operationally again, through the work we're doing in Future Northants, we will be splitting that into north and west and having a look at that outline profile and then obviously sharing that through those structures. So we'll absolutely do that work.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the current forecast underspend on the schools block relates largely to dedelegations which are ring-fenced and would need to carry forward to the new unitary authorities. That's created through a per pupil. Those budgets are created historically through a per pupil amount, and that's the basis on which we would be sort of looking at how it's apportioned going forward. Because they're ring fenced, they have to carry forward if they're underspent. The table below shows risks and opportunities within the schools block for 2021. Not a great deal there's not large worries either way. We have small rates gains on academy converters depending on the time within the year at which they convert. And there's a potential risk of the costs of redundancies having to be picked up on deficit budgets. I've put under there that the risk of costs to DSG from schools in deficit are currently very small. We can claim back from the government any deficits arising at the point of conversion to academy. And there's also a redundancy scheme that maintain primary schools contribute through the dedelegation system. So here's a bit more information on the forecast overspend in the high needs block. A lot of this information was presented in the Schools Forum meeting in July, but this is reiterated really for the new Shadow Forum members. There's a relationship between the budgets that we're looking at which are overspent. So we've got the out-of-county provision, which includes independent schools within Northamptonshire and actually outside of Northamptonshire schools where children might have to be placed. When SEN unit places are full, pupils are having to be placed in independent schools more often, and that's significantly more expensive. In the last 5 years, there's been a significant increase in the move between mainstream and special provision for the cohort of pupils with EHC plans. In primaries, this has risen from 27% to 52%, and in secondaries, this has moved from 37% to 68%. And the trend continues at approximately 4% per annum. Excuse me. Many specialist places have opened to cope with increased demand, and more are planned. Since 2015, the number of specialist places available has increased by 50%. Currently, all the special school places are full to capacity, but we have been working with special schools to find innovative ways to open new provision. I think later on, Gwyn will give a further update to this, but work is underway to increase SEN unit provision. And currently 6 proposals are under discussion, with more longer term proposals being considered. The SEN unit budget for 2021 included an increase of 900,000, of which 750,000 is already earmarked for 3 new units for 30 pupils. More placements are expected to be needed after the start of the new academic year in September, and that continued pressure continues. So moving on to the early years block, the current forecast is a nil variance to budget. The risks and opportunities reported at the last forum related to the July 2020 DSG adjustment. That adjustment has since been received and shown an overall improvement of 100,000 to the 3- and 4-year-old and 2-year-old free entitlements budget, but has unfortunately decreased the maintained nursery supplement funding by 201,000. 74,000 of that relates to a 2019-20 retrospective adjustment, where the January 2020 census is used to adjust the final 7 months of 19-20. There are also the following unquantified risks. The COVID-19 support that's being worked on at the moment, that Jess will talk about later. That support may take the overall early years block into an overspend position, and we're mitigating that risk by financial modelling using the September and October update rates, take rates, sorry, that should say, to look at what's happening within the sector in different localities. High needs is likely to overspend again for early years in 2021, and work is underway to quantify the impact of that. So in summary, the schools block has small underspends forecast, largely relating to the maintained schools de-delegations, which will be carried forward. The high needs block has a significant worsening of the financial position. 5.3 million overspend is predicted. The early years block, there's a break even expected as financial modelling is underway to make sure we achieve that position. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions, colleagues, for Beth, just on there is a early years update later on, so that just on the monitoring position, any questions there? Okay, then if no questions there on the monitoring position, we'll move on to then DSG funding announcements, provisional. Beth, for 21-22.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll share my screen again. This isn't all about the provisional settlement at the moment. This is I've presented here a paper that was taken to the Future North Hants team, and it's a very large presentation that would probably take up all of our time to go through, but I just wanted to pick out some salient points, and it's to show more about the detail of how the funding will be split as we go into the 2 new unitaries. So I'm going to skip through the slides, but it's there for you to take away and read, and you can email me if you have any questions about any of this work. So the first slide is number 4 that I'm going to have a look at. And this is about how the grant is formulated and a formula to come into us as a council to then distribute. You can see for the schools block that 96.8% of the funding is basically driven by pupil numbers. There is a pupil unit of funding, a primary unit of funding, PUF, and a secondary unit of funding, SUF. And the funding comes into us based on the October census preceding the financial year. Then there's a much smaller percentage, that's 2.4%, approximately 12 million, which is driven by premises factors like rates and PFI, and that's linked to school postcodes, so that can be quite easily separated, and into the Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. And then the 0.8% of funding, which has been about 4 million. We don't know what the 21-22 figure will be yet. And that's driven by growth from the prior year, which is linked to super output area population increases as a particular calculation that the Education Skills and Funding Agency do to arrive at that growth funding. Again, that's sort of lagged by a year, the impact of the growth within the counties. So you see a lag in terms of how the growth is actually moving. Then the high needs block, 53.9% of that funding was based on proxy indicators, which are population, deprivation, ill health, disability and prior attainment. And they're statistics that the government collect, and they're using those statistics that they already collect for other purposes to help drive this funding through a formula to arrive at a fair distribution of the high needs block funding across the country. 33.7%, a large part of the high needs block funding is based on historical spend, which relates to 17-18, and that was based on the current expenditure of back in that year. So we will need to be working with the ESFA to talk to them about how the current spend can inform the new historical fact part of this high needs block going into the 2 new unitaries. That's a harder piece of work for us to unpick. Then there's a 10.1% of the funding, which is based on pupil numbers from an autumn census. And it's a postcode driven thing, where those schools lie and where those pupil numbers are then multiplied by a funding rate, and that's how that funding is achieved. Then there's a smaller amount, the 2.3% of funding, and this relates to the question that we talked about earlier, to do with cross-border movements. This just relates to the DSG. This isn't the sort of the travel budget, which sits in NCC. But there's a funding that stream of 2.3% here that's based on places where at the moment it's where Northamptonshire places children in a different county. That's an export, and you compare that to the number of places we fund from pupils that are based out in other counties like Bedfordshire and Milton Keynes, Leicestershire, and that is then netted off each other, and you get a net import or a net export. We have been a net exporter for some time, and in 2021 that's recently moved up to £1 million reduction. Well, it's not reduction in our funding, it's a top slice of our funding to fund those counties where our pupils are placed. So moving on to the early years and the central school services block. Early years block, that's again largely driven by census data. The early years block is funded based on 2 January censuses, the January preceding the financial year, and the number of re-entitlements being claimed within census week, the children that they have there, and then also the January within the financial year. In most years, that would be a 5/12 would be the January preceding, and the 7/12 would be the January within the financial year. And that adjustment comes after the end of the financial year in July. The recent changes that we'll talk about later, the autumn announcement and autumn 2019, the change to that funding is that the January preceding will fund 9 months of 2021, and the January within the year will fund 3 months, and we'll receive that update in July 2021. So 8.5% of the funding comes from the 2-year-olds and 85.1% comes from 3 and 4-year-olds. There's also approximately 2 million, that's less than that now, early years maintain nursery supplement funding, and 1 million disability access funding for early years and early years pupil premium grant. The Central School Services block, that's made up of about 35% ongoing responsibilities based on census data. So again, that's simple to split into the unitaries based on where the census children are from, as well as schools postcodes. And 31% is based on historical spend. That includes costs that are historical teachers' pensions, related costs relating to prior to 2013, I think it is, and also combined NCC DSG budgets. There's also a 3.1 million one-off adjustment for property that took place in 2021. It's worth noting that the historical part, the 3.1 and the 3.4, is reducing by 20% each year. And so we're having to look at savings from within these combined budgets each year. So that's an overview of how the funding comes to us and how largely it can be separated based on census data. So it's, the vast majority isn't a difficult piece of work. But of course, it's always the small parts that take the longest. I've just lost control of my mouse for some reason. Skim through with my cursor. So looking at the provisional announcement of funding, I've got a table here which shows how the gross funding has moved from 2016-17 across to the provisional national funding formula announced in July in 2021-22's budgets. Just moving down. So looking at the movements between 2021 and 21-22, this table outlines the indicative increase from the national funding formula. There's the 20% historical reduction in the Central School Services block at the top of 2 million. There's the schools block increase of 40 million, the high needs block of 10 million increase. At the moment, we don't have the national funding formula funding provisional announcement hasn't included their early years block, and we expect to get that at a later date. Within that announcement on the national funding formula, the teachers' pay and pension grant has been rolled into the schools block, and that's 23 million. So the actual increase within the schools block, if you don't count that, is 17 million. I'm surprised by the national funding formula's position of Northamptonshire being a net importer in the imports and exports correction. So I'll be interested to see when we get the actual final settlement what the import and export adjustments are likely to be for Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. I'm budgeting and looking at budgets on the basis of it not changing from the 1 million that it currently is, 1.1 million. So that's actually a swing of 1.5 million based on what we're looking at. So that would come off the high needs block. So I think when we're looking at the increase in the high needs block, we should be looking at that 10 million with caution. I think until we have the final settlement, I'm working on a sort of an 8.5, 8.6 million increase. So overall, I'm looking at about a 23.9 million DSG increase. So I've put a bit more detail further down on the different parts that make up the blocks and how the provisional increase is shown within the detail. All of this information is available on the government website. If you type in gov.uk and do a search on DSG, you can come up with these schedules. It's in the public domain. And then finally, this was the first piece of work that we've done, looking to disaggregate how we think the funding will come to us on 2021-22 budgets, and how we believe that will be split over West and North. Obviously, a small percentage on such a large budget can make quite a big swing. So the difference between 55% and 45% and 54% and 46% can make quite a big swing. And that's all really I wanted to bring your attention to on this presentation. Does anybody have any questions?
So can I just to be clear, so it looks as if there's more money coming into the schools block, but actually a large proportion of that money coming into the schools block is actually money that we were getting somewhere else. So it's not the increase.
That's right, yeah. And it is quite clearly shown in the government papers on the website how much how much of the teachers' pay grant and the teachers' pension grant is being rolled in, and also how there are mechanisms to ensure that gets paid across to through the schools funding formula to schools within the minimum per pupil amount, so that it's not lost with any local formula factor nuances. Looks like I've got a question. So I've got a question from Muriel from the SFA. What assumptions are made on the CSSB historic split spend for the 2 new LAs, and also on high needs? Do these numbers include the SEN independent places split? At the moment, we're working on broad percentages for those until we can get down into the detail, which we are working on at the moment. We've requested pensions information from the Teachers Pension Fund, and I've received that in the last week, which we've had to pay for to get that information. And so we have that split now. So we're working taking those calculations through, and we'll be able to bring you more information at the next meeting. To see if we've got any more.
So can I just check, we had to pay pensions to get the information that we need to, so that we can make sure that we apportion the pensions properly?
That's right, yeah, because it's an additional burden on them. They've had to assign somebody to do the work, to delve into the detail, to find which unitary does it belong to, what's the cost of each of those pensions.
Thank you. Okay, there's a lot in that presentation, isn't there, Beth? So I would encourage everybody to have a look at that, and to really, you know, when you've got a small moment with a cup of tea and a biscuit, and really just have a look through that and really take in each slide and what it means, you know, for the 2 new unitary authorities, what it means within that, perhaps for your school. And it's difficult to look at schools or sectors at this point, but there is lots of information there about the North and the West, the trajectory that we are moving in, even if we don't have some of the finer detail yet. So thank you very much, Beth, and to whoever put all of that together with you. So if there are no other comments, so we will funding formula 2021-22 update. Beth, you are still in the spot.
Thank you. I'll share my screen again. This is a brief one, you'll be pleased to know. So the key changes in the school's funding formula between 2020 and 21-22 are there's an update to the deprivation affecting children index. The data set has been updated to 2019, so you might see a change in your funding based on those changes. Grants rolled into the funding formulas we've talked about, and there's an increase in the per pupil funding and minimum per pupil funding to ensure that those grants that are rolled in are received by schools. The sparsity has changed. That doesn't affect us hugely. We've got a few schools who benefit from that, but there's a change in value which we will look to continue the basis of following the national funding formula as far as possible, unless Schools Forum sort of tells us otherwise.
Can I just, sorry, Beth, can I just go back to that previous point, just thinking about that, because the announcement was that schools would get that minimum amount, but are we now getting that minimum amount because the teachers' pay and pensions grant has been put into the formula? Is that how we're suddenly getting, it's not really that we're getting any more money?
You are getting more money because there's an 8% increase in funding.
That includes that grant?
That grant. So there is the 17 million increase that's going in addition to the 23 million that's rolled in for the teachers' pay grant and pension employer contribution grants. I'll put the next slide up because that shows there's a funding floor of 8% in the national funding formula and a 12% cap applied. We'll have to still do the modelling to see when we receive the final budgeting tools for North Northamptonshire and West Northamptonshire. We'll have to put this all through with our available funding to see if we can match the national funding formula. We were able to in 2020-21, and I think because we've been moving to the national funding formula for so many years, I'm hopeful that we'd be able to do it again, but we need to do that modelling to see what it's going to look like. So the national funding formula is giving an 8% funding floor and a 12% cap, and each the minimum per pupil funding level is increased to take account of that pension and pay grant that's been rolled in.
Okay.
So you have the all-pew increases on the left-hand side, the basic per pupil funding, but that's the part where if further down the formula you're on a minimum funding guarantee or a cap, that might not end up being the final position. So the minimum per pupil funding level on the right is a kind of an overarching protection that can't be affected by the other kind of capping and flooring.
So the one on the right is the one we really are looking at?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'd still, it depends where you are in the year on year for whether the left-hand side would be affected. We have an area cost adjustment of 1.0328. I'll just put that down there because the national funding formula publish the information with the rates and then they do a separate line to show the area cost adjustment. But when we publish our funding detail with the national funding formula, we apply it to the rates on each line. So you might see a slightly higher rate value, but it is still following the national funding formula.
Okay, thank you.
So I've just put in there, our aim has been to follow the national funding formula as far as is affordable since the funding arrangements came into existence. We were fully on the NFF, even with a 0.25% transfer this current year for the high needs funding block. We aim to follow the national funding formula again for West Northamptonshire and North Northamptonshire Schools funding formula in 21-22. We're currently modelling to see what will be affordable, but we currently have draft provisional figures and we have a draft budget tool from the ESFA. So that will be updated and brought to you in December. Any questions?
I think we've got two questions in the chat there. So there's a question from Kevin, which is about when the pay grants are no, presumably that rolls in and then stays within the base.
Yes, yeah, that's then base.
Pay grant, isn't there?
So I'll just read the question. Yeah, so that would then become part of the DSG rolling forward.
And then there's a question from Rob about high needs.
So high needs budget is now forecast to overspend by 5.3 million this year, and this is up 1.4 million overspend in, I think, the 2019-20, I think is
2015, I think, going back.
Right. There is a significant amount of work underway, and Gwyn is here to talk about that with Sharon on a later item. So I think I'll probably, if you don't mind, Rob, I'll leave that to Gwyn and Sharon to talk to in the high needs item.
Yeah, I think when we come to talking about the sufficiency strategy and the places, that's something that can be picked up at that point, if that's okay, Sharon and Gwyn, and then we can come back to that. Okay, thanks, Rob. Okay, Beth, any other questions then, just about the funding formula for next year going forward? Lots of work obviously still to do, particularly with the disaggregation aspect of that, but those are the key points at a central level. Yeah. Okay, well, everybody, we now have a 20-minute break. It is cup of tea time. If you want to turn your video off while you go and make your cup of tea, I will see you here at 2:20 past 2.